right? Because if we send these pilots on these low-level flights and they get shot at, the military's automatic response is we're going to protect our pilots and retaliate. If they shoot these pilots down over Cuba, we're not going to sit on our hands, we're going to retaliate. Well, President Kennedy listens to the discussion and agrees to allow these risky low-level surveillance flights because he knows we need them to see how close those missile bases are to being operational. And his decision to allow these flights made Kenneth O'Donnell incredibly uncomfortable. Incredibly uncomfortable. Now you put yourself, let's really think about this. Why is O'Donnell uncomfortable about this decision the President made to allow these low-level flights, Brady? You're pretty close. Anybody else have a why he'd be concerned? What does the military want? They want a naval quarantine. They want to kick ass and take names, man. They want to get in there on these airstrikes and get after it. O'Donnell's saying, you're getting set up here. You know these pilots are going to get shot at. There's no question. You're coming over the deck low level. They don't know whether these are cameras or bombs. They're going to be shot at. And then the military's going to want to protect these pilots, and they're going to go in there and shoot, and the next thing you know, we've got ourselves a war. Just what you're trying to stay out of. Now, both the Russians and the Cubans are aware that the United States knows of these missiles and missile construction sites in Cuba, so like I said, how are they going to know whether these flights on the deck are cameras or missiles? O'Donnell firmly states to President Kennedy, you know these planes are going to get shot at. And he knew that when the planes were fired upon, it would be the President's responsibility to protect the pilots. And protecting these pilots could result in military airstrikes in Cuba, followed by invasion, the exact action that President Kennedy wanted to avoid. He thinks the military is setting him up. So when President Kennedy insisted on granting the permission for the flights, O'Donnell knew it was up to him to find a solution to this serious problem. So what does he do? What's he going to do to solve this problem? He's going to excuse himself and go in his office, and he's going to call Commander William B. Ecker, one of the two pilots that's going to be flying these low-level flights over Cuba. So he goes back to his office and he calls Commander William B. Ecker, who's going to be one of the two pilots flying these low-level surveillance flights. He gets on the phone with Ecker and he says, I'm passing an order from President Kennedy to you. Yes, sir, what's the order? Don't get shot down. And after a surprised Ecker responded to O'Donnell's request, wouldn't you be a little surprised if they called you and told you not to get shot down? How do you know what's going to happen, right? O'Donnell went on to further explain the following. You don't have to write any of this down, just listen. Now I've known the man for 15 years. The problem is he will protect you. So I am asking, don't make him protect you. Don't get shot at. Like he has control over that, right? Okay? Well, during the successful mission, both Ecker and Lieutenant Bruce Wellamy were heavily fired upon. Heavily fired upon. Matter of fact, it was kind of funny when they got back from the mission, which was, you'll see it on video, it's incredible. They get back and they've got all these 50 caliber rounds shot through their wings from the ground, and they make it back safely, and they get on there, and Wellamy's all excited, woo, adrenaline rush, and Ecker's trying to keep his composure, and they come back and they sit down and they get up around everybody, and as they land, Ecker says, damn sparrows, those are bird strikes. And one guy that's on the ground says, well, are they 50 caliber or 70 caliber bird strikes? I'm not sure. He passed them off as sometimes when you're flying, you can run into a flock of birds and they can damage your airplane. And he said, hey, that's it. That's what we're going with. These are bird strikes. Great big 50 caliber holes in the airplane wings. Anyway, what was really weird after that, and this was very unusual, is Commander Ecker was asked by his superior officers to deliver that film from their planes to the Pentagon personally. That never happens. That never happens. So Ecker gets on the ground, he completes the mission, they take the pictures they need, and he gets a call from his superior officers that they want him to deliver the film personally to the Pentagon. Ecker thought that was so weird that he called Kenneth O'Donnell at the White House and told him about it. He said, hey, I just want you to know they're asking me to personally deliver this film to the Pentagon, which is very unusual. What do you think they did that for? Why did General LeMay and General Maxwell Taylor ask William B. Ecker to personally deliver that film? Yeah, and ask him what? Did you get shot at? They want to know. Okay? So O'Donnell knows this is the case. He talks to Ecker and he says, you do not understand the importance of not being shot at. I know this goes against everything you've been taught as a military commander, but you don't understand the implications if you go in there and tell them you were shot at, because they're going to want to retaliate. So, Ecker personally delivers the film to the Pentagon, and General LeMay says this direct quote to him. He says, son, I want to know just one thing. Those bastards shoot as much as a BB gun at you? First question he asked him when he got in there. Delivers the film, and General LeMay says, son, I want to know just one thing. Those bastards shoot as much as a BB gun at you? You know what Ecker's response was? That's all he said. It was a cakewalk, sir. And walked out the door. It was a cakewalk, sir. That's what he said. Whoa, that was pretty tense. Okay? Now, back at the White House during this time, President Kennedy speaking with Secretary of State Dean Rusk. And a group called the Organization of American States is about to meet, and they're going to vote either in support or not in support of America's actions towards Cuba concerning the blockade. So, the topic of discussion between Secretary of State Dean Rusk and President Kennedy was the fact that a vote was going to be conducted that night by the Organization of American States. And this organization, which was a little bit kind of a low-level United Nations, okay, was going to vote to be either in support or not in support of the United States actions concerning the quarantine of Cuba. Now, President Kennedy is pushing Secretary of State Rusk to make sure that he gets a unanimous vote in favor of what the United States is doing. Okay? How easy is it to get a unanimous vote on a controversial issue? And the Secretary of Rusk says, the Organization of American States have never had a unanimous vote on anything in the history of the organization. He says, I don't care, Dean, unanimous. I want a unanimous vote. There was no choice. You get in there and get a unanimous vote, basically, or you don't come back. Well, I'll be darned if they didn't vote that evening and Rusk persuaded them into a unanimous vote to support the actions of the United States and Cuba concerning that quarantine. His point was, if I can't get my own Congress to support me, I'll get the Organization of American States, which is more of a diplomatic organization. So the vote came back later that evening. That night, it's been a long day, but it's 7:06 p.m. 7:06 p.m. President Kennedy signed Proclamation 3504. And Proclamation 3504 was a presidential proclamation that officially authorized the naval quarantine in Cuba. It had never been officially put into act. But at 7:06 p.m. on Tuesday, October 23rd, 1962, President Kennedy signed Proclamation 3504, which officially authorized the naval quarantine of Cuba. That proclamation stated that the quarantine would go into effect at 10 a.m. the next morning, Wednesday, October 24th, 1962. That quarantine of Cuba would go into effect at 10 a.m. the next morning on Wednesday, October 24th. To end this very stressful and busy day, President Kennedy received two more bits of bad news before he went to bed that night. He received two more bits of bad news before he went to bed that night. What do you think some of the news might be considering what went on that day? What was some bad news you got? Very, not complete, but those photographs that were taken by Ecker and Willoughby stated that the launching pads were clearly defined because they were so close to the deck and they were getting closer and closer to becoming operational. Once they're operational, you realize that once they become operational, we may need to airstrike. That option's got to be there. Of course, we're not going to have the element of surprise, which CIA Director John McCone complained about so much. But that's still an option. But these photographs showed clearly these construction launch pads and the fact that they were closer and closer to operational. That's the first bit of bad news he got. Second thing is there was a regularly scheduled hydrogen bomb test that was initiated by the United States military off Johnston Island in the South Pacific. So we were out there testing hydrogen bombs, which was scheduled in the schedule. It was a routine deal, but probably the timing wasn't very good, and the president was very upset that we weren't smart enough in the military to maybe postpone that testing of that hydrogen bomb at this point in our country's history, because how would the Soviets see it? As a preparation for war. So a regularly scheduled hydrogen bomb test was initiated by the United States military off Johnston Island in the South Pacific, and although it was routine, the president was upset because the timing of the test was unfortunate concerning the circumstances that we were in. So what's going to happen Wednesday, October 24th? What's going to happen? We're going to see these ships are going to stop or not, right? That's the whole idea. So we talk about Wednesday, October 24th. According to historians, this day is going to be proved to be the most trying of all of the 13 days. This is going to be the one where we're under the most stress. Now, President Kennedy wants control of things. So he's going to stay in the White House with XCOM, but who do you think he's going to send to the Pentagon to make sure he's in complete conversation with about military action that may or may not be taken that day? What? No, he's going to, military. That's why I said that. Who's going to, no, he's going to send somebody in his cabinet that's on XCOM, because LeMay is already involved in all this other stuff. He's going to send his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. He's going to be stationing him at the Pentagon with a speaker system so they have direct communication. So President Kennedy sends Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara to the Pentagon so he can directly communicate with him, because at 10 a.m., what are they putting in effect? The quarantine. Okay? Well, just shortly before 10 a.m., McNamara reports from the Pentagon to XCOM, who were back at the White House, that there was no sign of the Soviet ships stopping. In other words, they were still a ways out from the quarantine line, but it's not like they were stopping. They were still coming full bore. Knowing that the Soviet ships are en route, President Kennedy at 10 a.m. officially announces to the Pentagon that the quarantine line is in effect. So those rules of engagement we talked about, and all the scenarios if they do this or that, it's go time. As these ships come towards the quarantine line, or the line drawn in the sand, President Kennedy at 10 a.m. announces to the Pentagon that the quarantine line was officially in effect. Well, shortly after that, Secretary of Defense McNamara is at the Pentagon with the military.
Teachers, please excuse the interruption. At this time, if we could have all state drama participants report to the Little Theater. Again, all state drama participants, please report to the Little Theater at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll just kind of stop there so you guys don't miss anything. But shortly after 10 a.m., McNamara is going to announce whether any ships are coming or not. Okay? So we will continue that tomorrow. Okay, state drama, kids.